Good morning, everybody. Jim Benton here with Chorus, here for the daily briefing. Happy Monday. Happy week of April 27th. It'll be May before the end of the week. And I'm here today with Spencer Wixom, SVP of Marketing at Challenger. Spencer, great to have you here today. How you doing?
Thanks. Pleasure.
Yeah, well, happy Monday. We've all read the Challenger Sale book. You're with a remarkable company. I know you've got a tremendous career being at CEB, which many of us have spoken at and been at those events in the past as well. So just excited to get your thoughts on our most updated data. I also noticed that were you an intern for the Supreme Court? Do I have that right?
Yeah, that was a long time ago, but it's funny because I'm not much of a legal scholar, but I really enjoy American art. And there are a number of wonderful pieces on loan from the National Gallery in the justices' chambers. And so my internship was all about making sure the justices didn't look stupid when somebody asked, you know, who painted that and what's all of the history behind that painting. So the thing I know most about in the court is the art that hangs on the walls.
Is there anything from your internship there, since that's such a unique thing that very few people have done, that has influenced you in your career in all these years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's really just it's funny because I was planning actually to go to law school before I did that internship. And what changed my mind was actually studying the art and just the amazing creation of these 19th century American Impressionists, in particular, folks like Thomas Moran and Albert Bierstadt, who were like adventure artists going out there and painting the American West, the landscapes, and bringing back something that people had never seen before. Like if you go to the American Museum, the Museum of American Art in Washington, D.C., there's an amazing Bierstadt called Among the Sierra Nevadas. And they have it set up exactly the way it would have been presented in the mid-19th century. And, you know, they'd bring these paintings back and they'd have them veiled behind a curtain. And they'd unveil the curtain to this amazing landscape of this territory people could only otherwise imagine. And it was just this incredible marketing event around this art. And that kind of got me interested in the cleansing awe that comes with creating something and presenting it to the market. I got home, I switched my major to business, went to business school, and have been on the marketing track ever since.
It's amazing. Well, then you're at this perfect spot, given Challenger and this the approach to presentation and storytelling, and that's fantastic. So
absolutely.
Hey, before we jump in, how are you holding up both at home and just this whole work from home? Is this new for you? What's life like for you?
Well, it's interesting because I live in Dallas, but work for a company out of DC. So it's not necessarily new to me. I've been working remote for a while, but it is new to a lot on our teams. We've had to shift a lot from kind of centralized offices with our SDR teams, with our delivery teams to this remote working environment. So we're figuring it out. And I mean, it's the tools and the technology that are really saving us. Being able to manage activity, monitor the quality of activity. Without a lot of those tools, we'd be lost.
One last question before we jump into the data. We've talked about some of the just work at home fatigue. There's different aspects people have talked about in the last week. And I'm curious if you've seen any pattern changes in your own way that people are working in the last couple of weeks versus where we were a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I think people are starting to recognize how much they can take in a given day and are balancing it out. And companies are being a little bit more flexible, hours included in, you know, the hours in the day that people are online, and people needing to take breaks in the middle of the day, maybe start a little bit later in the morning, switch off with spouses to manage kids. And I just think it's such an important thing for manager and coaching conversations to include an exploration of that and in working through a lot of that.
I think it's right. The one technique I've been using in the last week that I've just enjoyed is mixing up the meetings with just the quick phone call icon in Slack for just a quick audio only, no video, sort of a quick catch up, maybe right after a meeting. But the intensity, it doesn't take as much energy. It's a lower energy event, and I think it enables these days to use energy the right way for the right events.
Yeah, you know, it's a good point. And I just think using those tools as well in a little more personal way of just how you doing? How's your family? With colleagues is really appreciative as well. I love that when I get that from somebody over a Teams or something of just checking in with you personally. How are you doing? Really helps build the culture and the camaraderie of the organization.
Well, speaking of that, when we look at meetings, so this is our most updated data for the week of April 20th. We see that the overall meeting volume across the market is up 3% week over week. So we're, for the most part, we've held steady since pre-COVID. Now, this isn't consistent across all segments, but I'm curious if this represents what you're seeing out in the marketplace, that overall sales meeting volume is essentially been holding up. It was down, but starting to come back over the last few weeks.
No, for sure. It is exactly what we're seeing. We're kind of climbing out of that late March, early April, really heavy slog when there was such a shock to the system. The interesting question that we're asking, and I know this is going to be a silly analogy, but we're asking what we call the Cotton Eye Joe question these days. Where does it come from? Where does it go when we think about meetings? And so you say, okay, overall meeting volume is starting to climb up. That's great, but the question is, where are those meetings come from, and how much effort is being expended to create those? How much more effort, should I say, is being expended to create those meetings than was before? Because we're seeing, show rates are still way down off of what they used to be. So you have to schedule a lot more meetings in order to complete those meetings. Also, you have a lot more marketing activity in inbound leads. Like your inbound to sales qualified lead conversion rates are likely a lot lower than they were before. So you really have to understand how much of this engine do we need to run to keep these meetings going up. And then on the back end of it, where does it go? What's your conversion rate to serious pipeline opportunities from meetings? And you really need to understand both sides of it to make sure your full funnel is as healthy as it can be.
Yeah, I think on the energy side, I know that at the end we've got some great data that you have just pulled at Challenger that we'll be sharing with the group. But from an energy standpoint, this is a good example where both at the buyer and seller side, and we'll start with the seller side, there's a lot more energy being invested. So we have a significant increase in executives and directors joining calls. Even last week, it was up again 7% week over week, 50% more executive involvement, 73% overall from directors. So this is a significant change since pre-COVID. This means more prep, and we're seeing, on the buyer side, similar patterns. Is this what you're seeing out there, Spencer?
Yeah, and I think it is, absolutely. And I think we've got to hand it to managers and senior leaders for really stepping up in this environment. My hope, and I've spoken to a few, I haven't spoken to as many as I'd like to, but my hope is what we're seeing with this is managers and senior leaders recognizing, okay, we've got to really nurture, coach, and support at a daily basis almost our sellers through what's a really tricky transition to a new selling conversation right now. A conversation that's much more around, particularly in those initial conversations, going in and creating the opportunity from scratch, assembling the buying group, as opposed to just a couple of months ago, much of the activity of these sellers was reacting to an established buying group, was reacting to established demand. Now it's a supply side sales conversation, and that, managers and senior leaders are stepping up to help kind of close and coach around that capability gap, which is an important thing. And then the other, and I think we'll get to this in a bit, is helping with more of the finance element, business acumen element, collections element that goes along with making sales activity happen these days.
Well, let me ask you about that. So we've seen also on the buyer side that it's up, significantly. So have execs on both sides up, but we're also seeing to the buying element that we're finally seeing a shift. So the first time in 7 weeks, we saw a bit of an uptick where the buying terms have changed. We saw a big decrease to the net 30, just starting to see that change a bit, which could be tied to enablement programs and a bit more focus on this. What advice do you have for teams out there that are changing this motion as a coaching mentality? How should people handle these initial conversations? What's different about them?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So just to kind of parlay play off of this data a little bit here in some research that we've done recently. Is we asked a few weeks ago senior sales leaders, like, what percentage of you are getting sellers involved in these payment conversations? And at the time, it was probably around less than 20%. And a couple of weeks later, we surveyed it, it's near 50%. So people are waking up quickly that we've got to get our sellers involved in talking about this. They need to be actively managing this element with their customers. And I think the other element of this that's interesting, so they've got to get comfortable with it quickly, and that's managers are stepping up to help that out. I think the other thing that's interesting is, yes, we're having more senior leaders, senior procurement, possibly CFO individuals on the buyer side involved in these conversations. So we need to help them understand very directly how our solutions affect or play with their operating cash cycle. And do we have a solution that can affect receivables, payables, inventory, revenue generation, all of that? Because it's not just about conserving cash in this environment, it's generating cash in this environment. You're just conserving cash and putting in a mattress, you're just delaying the inevitable bad outcomes. If you can be helping and supporting organizations in generating cash and operating more effectively to have more cash on hand, and if your solution helps with that and you can articulate that clearly, I think you're in a really good position.
Do you find that with such an increase in executives joining calls that teams need to retrain? I mean, we have more execs joining calls that, the dynamic changes, the flow is different. How do we make sure that we're still delivering, an incredible experience? People are working well. Do the execs know how to deliver the new material? Are you seeing an increase in just training of the exec teams in this, or how to get these teams to be a cohesive unit now that this is happening on such a high percentage of calls? Spencer, I might have lost you for a second. You froze. Give you a second there. But if you can hear me, I just got a frozen screen.
Frozen screen. Am I back?
Yep, you're good. Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, you're good.
Look, one of the things that we're seeing is an importance in having those pre-call conversations to really understand the role of the account manager, the sales in that conversation, so they're not handing over the relationship to the executive, right? That's a concern we've got in this, where there's executives as part of these calls much more frequently, that it becomes every sales deal, every deal is a top-to-top deal. And then, what are the account managers then able to come in after that and handle the more tactical elements of that deal as they move it forward? So it's important. Yes, it's great for the executives to be on those calls to add that perspective and that credibility, but the account manager needs to maintain his or her role throughout. If you diminish that role, then your productivity is going to go way down.
Couldn't agree more. From your own experience, Spencer, when you're getting pulled in calls over the last few weeks, what role do you typically play? How do you start, end, and just what have you found to be that dynamic?
Yeah, look, it's the thing that I'm trying to play a role in is just sharing perspective on the market and we're trying to gather research and we're trying to share that research. But as far as negotiating particulars, managing, accounts and relationships and such, we're making sure that stays on the account managers and our directors, because that's the role we want them to continue to play. But hopefully we're adding that upper kind of overall umbrella of value based on the research that we're doing and the perspectives we can bring.
I think that's fantastic feedback, because I do think that the AEs and AMs owning that relationship, feeling in a positive way, that accountability and strong ownership and next steps is critical. So I also we've included your most recent data. If you can give us context of how you're getting the data, and I just love your insights and appreciate you bringing this to everybody today.
Yeah, sure. So we've been doing a pulse survey every 2 weeks of our community of sales leaders, marketing leaders, to really understand what's changing in the market. That's our primary interest here, is how our perspectives changing. And we've seen a significant amount of change over the month and a half that we've been running this. And if you're interested in seeing the history of that, it's on our website, a series of blog posts and infographics. But in our most recent one, where we really wanted to dive in deeper is in the sales velocity equation, the components of the sales velocity equation, and understand broadly the perspective sales leaders have on what's changing around that equation. Because the various levers in this equation, if they all change at once, it can create a significant hole in your pipeline and in your ability to hit your revenue targets. So we looked at each of them individually, and what was the percentage of leaders who felt like they would see a 5% or greater reduction or change in that lever versus those who wouldn't. And you can see on the far left there, number of pipeline opportunities, 77% of these sales leaders said, yeah, this is going to diminish 5% or greater. So we're going to be putting fewer opportunities into the pipeline. And a lot of that is a result of it takes just so much more activity to find candidates that we can warm up, that we can have conversation with and actually convert those to opportunities. Cycle time, what's interesting about that, there are some organizations that'll see, an increase in cycle time, which is the negative element there. But more often it's going to remain steady, or it may actually decrease. If you're selling an essential product right now, that cycle time is going to compress really fast. Average deal size is kind of a similar thing to cycle time, not seeing a significant change in that. Most believe that'll stay about the same. It's just fewer opportunities to transact. And then conversion rate is more similar to number of pipeline opportunities. So seeing a greater than 5% reduction in conversion rate. So this tells us a couple of things or places where organizations need to focus. Number one, they need to focus on how do we get as many good quality opportunities in the pipeline as possible? How are we capturing attention effectively, converting that initial attention into an interest to have a conversation with us and make sure that conversation sticks? Then secondly, with conversion rate, how do we just improve the quality of every step in the sales motion? Having a powerful discovery call leading to our solution, matching that solution, building consensus in the organization, making sure we're carrying things through as effectively as we can.
It's interesting that there's a segment out there, 23% that's saying, no, pipeline's not being impacted, sales cycles are shorter. It isn't holistically everybody that's being impacted equally here. I thought your comment about, the ability to create these opportunities right now around the empathy, but also just the crispness of being a business essential. Can you talk just a little bit more about what teams could be doing to make sure that they're resonating and breaking through the noise right now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, it goes back to what I was saying earlier is when you're connecting to sort of the pain of that particular business, first of all, do you understand what's relevant to them right now? Do you understand what their priorities are? And many of those priorities relate to like operating cash cycle, the financial health of the business. So are we aligning our solution to how it supports or helps that particular component of the business? I think the other important thing is there's so much noise out there right now. There's so much thought leadership being thrown around. First of all, is our message simple? Is it clear? Does it play to the intuition, the emotional intuition of the customer, such that they, as simply and easily as possible, recognize what it is that we have to offer and can understand why they would want to engage with us? And I think it's very important. The interesting distinction, I think, is thought leadership is a lot of content that tries to make you look smart and you look credible. Commercial insight, on the other hand, is content that has the customer thinking deeply about their situation and their business. And those two things are very important. They're very different and important to have that distinction. Are we speaking to what's most concerning in the customer's business right now? Because that's what's going to get their attention.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. One last question for you, Spencer. Just from my experience working with Challenger and other groups, there's a lot of live events that drive that industry. And I'm not sure if that's exactly how Challenger's been doing it, but from a marketing standpoint, any thoughts or advice for leaders out there that have relied on live events, and how are you thinking about this right now?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, clearly there's no live events happening right now, and a lot of the like big events, multiple day kind of conferences and events like that, they're trying to go digital, and I think they're doing so with mixed success. I think you have to be very cognizant of people's time and people's capacity to consume information digitally, as opposed to being part of a full experience at a hotel or a resort or something like that. It's a very different mindset, I think, that people come to the different things. That said, I've been very pleasantly surprised with just the hunger to learn and the hunger for insight and perspective by people. Just seeing populations on, webinars, seeing people who are attending a lot of these events. If you can get it right, if you can make it bite-sized, make it easy for people to consume,
Yeah.
they're hungry to participate. They're hungry to be a part of something. And the technology, I think, has really stepped up. I mean, it's doing some amazing things to engage people at the group level, to give them, presentations, and it's functioning, in my mind, on average, better than I had expected it would.
Amazing. Consistent with what we hear from everybody else out there. It's a pretty remarkable time for all of us. Well, tomorrow I've got Zach Anderson, VP of Customer Success of Product Board, remarkable company, joining me. And Spencer, I just want to say thanks for kicking off the week. Great to have you here on a Monday, and just really appreciate the insights and a fun conversation to start the day.
Great, Jim. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, cheers.
Take care. Goodbye.